So thank you very much for joining us today. The objectives of this call are to take a moment to pause 4 months on from CBA 14, which took place in September, and take a moment to reflect on CBA 14's messages. What we would like to do is use these opportunities at Gobeshona and CBA and D&C days to explore the messages that come out of these conferences with colleagues from the community-based adaptation community. Think about them, think about where we might be able to organize a deeper reflection, where we might need to carry out more work, or where we might need to have further discussions so that we can continue to innovate and advance ideas. And this session is really about doing that. What we want is to draw on the expertise in the room. I know some of you were at CBA 14, some of you may be planning on coming to CBA 15, and I hope that you've also gathered a lot from being at Gobeshona as well. And there's an opportunity now to enter into a discussion, to reflect on the messages and think about where we go from here. So just as a brief recap, CBA 14, which took place in September, had 5 themes. And those 5 themes broadly reflect some of the major issues that are emerging in the super year. So climate finance, each theme was centered around a question. The climate finance theme looked at how public and private sector finance can be mobilized to scale up climate action and remain inclusive. The adaptation technology theme looked at how technology can be used to bring about adaptation at national level and be integrated through policy and finance. The responsive policy theme took a particular focus this year on social movements and how they're informing policy. As you remember, last year was a big year for social movements, and it tried to reflect that. This was the first year for the nature-based solutions theme, and looking at how nature-based solutions can be made to work for people, nature, and climate. And the youth stream, which became the youth inclusion theme, took a particular focus on how young people can be included in decision-making processes. So today what we're going to do is take a moment to reflect on 3 of the 5 of those themes, and we're going to reflect on the climate finance, responsive policy, and nature-based solutions themes. So what we have are 3 speakers who are going to give you a short presentation on the themes that were discussed at CBA and some of the major talking points that emerged from those themes. And after that, we're going to take a moment to split into breakout groups and reflect on where are we with those talking points. So I'm going to go on to our first speaker. It's Obed Koringo from CARE International. He was a theme lead for the responsive policy theme, and he is going to share some of the key messages. So Obed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sam. I hope you can hear me clearly.
We can.
Thank you so much. As Sam has rightly put it, my name is Obed Koringo. I work at International and I'm based in Nairobi. And I was one of the co-leads in the responsive policy theme during CBA 14. Responsive policy theme majorly focused, Sam has said, focused on how social movement can inform policy, which is ambitious, to meet the Paris Agreement targets and improve climate adaptation communities. We had around 4 sessions under this theme. The first session was on listening to grassroots voices and hearing their experiences and insights on how they've organized themselves and transferred and scaled up their efforts and claimed resources, both at regional, local, and national level. Then the second session was on impacting policies, which talked about policy on a broader level, while highlighting policy perspectives, accomplishments, and challenges, successes, and lessons learned to build more policy incentives to the grassroots. The third session was on grounding policy, which shared experiences and practical lessons on how realities of communities and local level participatory processes have fed into local, subnational, and adaptation policies and planning processes. And last but not least, we had a session on bringing community voices in water and climate policy discourse, where We had grassroots voices sharing their experiences in their engagement in water issues and policy discourse at the grassroots level. We had around 6 messages that came out of the responsive policy theme. Of course, there are so many messages, but these are the main messages that I'm going to share today, and which will form part of the discussion that we'll have later on. And number 1 message was on grassroots communities need greater access to decision-making spaces. Trust in their ability to be effective comes when they are given the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge in practice as organized and empowered agents of change. For instance, women face a double burden from the impact of climate change based on their structural inequalities and cultural norms. And they must have a seat at the table as partners in decision-making and have the resources to be able to do so if change is to happen at scale. Number 2 message focused on gaps between policy-making processes. And it talked about there are significant gaps between the policy-making processes. For instance, the national adaptation plans, which most often involve implementing agencies with little connection to or knowledge of the complexity at the local level. Sometimes we find that government actors are not aware of different types of vulnerability and priorities locally, and governments were urged to establish formalized structures that create spaces for grassroots communities to engage, negotiate, and influence local, subnational, and national planning and policy processes. Number 3, there is power in numbers. And of course, grassroots alliances and networks have greater power because of their numbers. Alliances and networks of women groups build influence and gain trust from local authorities by demonstrating their knowledge in practice and contributing to their time, labor, and resources. And Apex organizations that, of course, represent the networks, many local organizations can be very effective in influencing decisions through representation at higher levels while building on collective action. Therefore, communities can be organized and empowered agents of change. Next slide, please. Agency and dignity must be at the core of policy action to be able to address vulnerability. Communities must be able to claim and retain the assets that underpin their identities as the basis of resilience to multiple threats. For instance, land is a very critical asset, and the ability to access this asset, use it, and controlling it influences community capacities to be able to withstand multiple climate shocks and stresses. Communities are not homogeneous. We find that local elites and local businesses and power holders have different agendas. Therefore, attention to locally led action therefore requires attention to diversity, inclusion, and intersectionality in order to understand local dynamics and ensure people who are vulnerable and marginalized are included in order to avoid an elite capture. Last but not least, multilateral organizations and international NGOs have a very important role to play in advancing grassroots-led action. For instance, by using their convening power to open doors for grassroots leaders when designing projects and engaging grassroots organization consultants and documenting their own practices and integrating their learning into design and programs. They also have a role to play in exposing decision makers to local realities and aggregating multiple groups together for stronger voices. Thank you so much. We'd like to stop here and look forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Obed, for that. We are going to move on straight on to Ebony Holland from IIED, who's going to talk to the nature-based solutions theme. If you have any questions for the speakers, please do put them in the chat. That goes for facilitators as well as participants. And we can take some clarifying questions immediately after the talks, and then we can have a more substantive discussion in the breakout groups. So please do share your comments in the chat if you have them. So over to you, Ebony, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry, Barry. Barry Smith will go next. He's going to talk to the climate finance team. So Barry, the floor is yours.
Hi, hello everyone. So it seems like a lifetime ago, but I attended Gobeshona last year, and that was actually and I did a presentation, and this was when we began to talk about the missing middle. This is like it was the launch of the locally led adaptation track for the GC, and one of the things we talked about was the missing middle, the climate finance provision. So, in recognition of that, that was the binding narrative for the climate finance theme, and it's really recognizing that at one end of the scale we have small grants, but often not terribly strategic, and they don't offer much in terms of building strong institutions, and then at the other end is large infrastructure projects and such like. But there's not really that much going on in the middle, and this is where the missing middle, or filling in the missing middle, is where money flows to help local institutions grow over time, so that they're in a position to channel client experience that's going to respond to local priorities. So to move the conversation on, the CBA, we really focused on practical examples on trying to fill in the missing middle, to try and demonstrate how finance can support local institutions to develop and to learn and to adjust over time with experience, and to help nurture local institutions and help them build a track record. So the first session that we had, this focused, one from Forest Farm Facility, one from Adel Sofala, and from Acumen. And these are three quite different organisations representing the whole of society. So we've got a public mechanism, a civil society mechanism, and a private mechanism. So they presented practical examples of how their mechanisms are channeling money into the hands of local communities to support locally led adaptation, and how they're helping to build stronger institutions over time. And this is with a view to bringing community-based adaptation to scale. The second session, this is a joint issue with the adaptation technology theme. You can help local actors participate in deliberative dialogues and how they can participate in policy decision making. So this session really looked at how technology can be used to increase community agency, just so that it better serves the needs of the communities. And again, the focus was on takeaway lessons of how digital technology already actually being deployed, but then how they can be scaled up and out, and then looking at the different innovations that are already there, because again, we wanted to really focus on practical examples. So we had different presentations and different types of technologies, including mobile technology, and then we looked at funding challenges for weather apps that has to be scaled up, and we looked at solar powered irrigation. Multilateral organizations, they've got a key role to play in local climate action and building strong sub-national institutions for adaptation scale. And often the money isn't flowing into the hands of local actors. It largely gets concentrated at the national level. But at the same time, there are innovative approaches that are emerging. You have the Adaptation Fund, MIE aggregator, and that provides small innovation grants. You've got the AID, which supports countries and communities in the Asia and the Pacific to scale at the enabling environment within countries to try and nudge it so that money can be funneled effectively to the local level. Next slide, please. So these are the overall key messages that emerged across from these three themes: built institutions and planned by bilateral donors and by many other funders. Donors need to begin to see success beyond just concrete results and outputs, and recognize that learning, and in particular learning from failure, that was a big one, can actually be considered as a criterion of success. So we need more flexible arrangements for funding to try and operationalize this. And development partners really need to be much less risk averse to try and sort of look at greater innovation. Those working to scale up finance, they need to take a more deliberate approach to shaping incentives. And this is very much aimed at the donors. I'll look at incentives that create legitimacy for local institutions so that they can respond to genuine local priorities. So essentially, this is looking at how adaptation success can be reconceptualized to create learning incentives and a focus on process and institutional capacity as a measure of adaptation success. So they really need to see success beyond just concrete results and outputs. Collaborative structures with local actors are necessary so that now a lot of this was on information flow, and this was on information flow to local people and to the institutions, coupled with capacity building to build better financial mechanisms work for people that are experiencing climate impact. So it's putting the right information in the hands of local actors. And that was a theme that came up time and time again across the sessions. And the last one is public-private partnerships can help link government, practitioners, NGOs, and civil society organizations and try to develop government subsidized private investment and support pre-investment in technical assistance for local actors. So I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barry. For that was really interesting. There were a few connection problems there, so I'm hoping that there'll be an opportunity in the breakout groups to pick up on some of the small gaps that came in. And Barry, you might just want to check the connection before we go into the breakout groups. I'm going to hand over now to Ebony Holland from IIED. She's going to speak and just summarize the nature-based solutions theme. Ebony, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sam, and hopefully you can all hear me okay. Maybe give me a little signal if you can't, but I'll push on. As I said, thanks very much for having me. It's really great to spend Saturday with you all, and I look forward to meeting many of you virtually as we move through this event. It's a real delight to talk to you about nature-based solutions this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. This was a really great theme at CBA 14 last year, and as Sam mentioned at the start, it was the first time that it was a theme at CBA, and I think that's really reflective of the trajectory that NBS is on at the moment in terms of getting much more influence in government, private sector, and other sectors involved in community-based adaptation. Before I go through the 4 key themes, which you can see on the slide in front of you, I did just want to define nature-based solutions. It can mean different things to different people, and perhaps for some of us it might be a newer term. So I am going to read out the IUCN definition of nature-based solutions, and that is that nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And this definition, the reason we use this one a lot is because it's not just about climate change. Nature-based solutions are also about human well-being and biodiversity and broader benefits as well. But certainly at CBA 14, we really teased out some of those climate links in particular. I think it's also worth mentioning that nature-based solutions are defined differently depending on who the audience is. For example, the private sector tend to use definitions of nature-based solutions that place a stronger emphasis on protecting investments, for example. But no matter who you talk to, nature-based solutions really are about how to use the natural environment to reach the goals and the outcomes that you seek to achieve. So CBA 14 last year, it was a fantastic event. For the nature-based solutions theme, there were 4 really fantastic events that focused specifically on nature-based solutions. The topics covered in those particular events included looking at NBS in the context of community forestry, building resilience to climate change, how to scale up NBS, which is a really big question at the moment, and how NBS can support communities to build back from COVID-19, which is of course a very relevant topic for us all at the moment. So from these 4 events, there were 4 key themes that were distilled through the discussions, and that is what you're looking at here in front of you on this slide. So I'll go through these one by one and just expand a little bit on the words that you see there. The first theme, well, the first key message is that integrated approaches to adaptation, including nature-based solutions, address key interlinked societal challenges. And this is really the point that I mentioned earlier, that nature-based solutions are a great opportunity to really address climate change, but also it's about biodiversity loss. It's about building holistic resilience to future shocks, for example, the global pandemic that we're going through at the moment. And so there really is a broad remit that nature-based solutions can bring in terms of the solutions that they offer. The second is touching actually on many of the themes that Obed mentioned as well earlier, and that's Indigenous people, women and local communities are already championing NBS. I think it's really important to note that NBS as a term may be newish to many of us and perhaps to various international and national processes going on, but the concepts have been recognised and used by Indigenous peoples for a very long time. So the idea behind a lot of nature-based solutions is not necessarily groundbreaking or new. It's simply getting a much wider audience at the moment. But certainly in this key message, it's really important to note that Indigenous peoples, women and local communities hold valuable traditional knowledge. They bring decades of experience of implementing them. And it's really important that this traditional knowledge is linked with science that's kind of going on at the moment. There often tends to be a much stronger emphasis on the science in various discussions on NBS, but it's very important that we bring in the traditional knowledge as well. And I think this is also really important because it enables better policies and more targeted investment as well. The third key message is really pertinent to the Gobeshona Global Conference this week, and that's around how key it is to work through locally based collective organisations. And this is also touching on some of the themes that Obed and Barry mentioned also in their overview earlier. And certainly at IIED, we're really committed to really looking closer at how to enable locally led action. So this key message is really about enabling local people and organisations to drive their own nature-based solution activities. And this is really about recognising that local organisations, you know, have really great capacity to aggregate multiple local activities to adopt integrated solutions. They can be really effective channels for finance to flow. And so really bringing local groups into the conversations around nature-based solutions is really important. And the final key message, and I'll wrap up with this one, is that there are clear linkages between nature-based solutions and other types of community-based adaptation. And again, Obed mentioned this, or mentioned some of these in his opening a few slides back. And it's, I think, really interesting to note there are lots of key themes emerging across the different themes of CBA 14. But really there's two sides to the coin with this particular key message. The first is that for nature-based solutions to be effective, it's not just about how to work with nature technically, it's not just knowing how to technically work with nature, but it's also about ensuring financial viability. It's about importantly including youth and women. It's about enabling or advocating for responsive policy and creating access to technology. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that for adaptation activities to be effective in themselves, they must also think about the healthy and thriving ecosystems that they're functioning in. So what you're seeing here is some really great key themes or key messages emerging from the nature-based solutions theme. And I'm looking forward to the breakout groups where we get into this in a little bit more detail. I'll leave it there, Sam.
Thanks very much, Ebony. And just before we go to the breakout groups, I'm going to add an interactive part of the session. I'm going to add one extra speaker to the roster. So we have Salim Hook on the call. He's the director of the International Centre for Climate Change and Development and the chair of the Gobeshona conference, and an opportunity to say a few words. So Salim, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for organizing this session and for the presentations we just had. I just wanted to take a few minutes out of your schedule to share a little bit about not so much the content of the advocacy, but the strategy of how to do advocacy based on many years of experience in this. So the first thing I would say is that we often think of just having messages as recommendations coming out of, papers we write or seminars we give or workshops we hold, and that's what I call a scattergun approach. You're shooting into the air. You don't know who you're shooting at. You hope you'll hit something, and it's somebody important. If you really want to be effective, then you do have to be more strategic and use more of a sniper gun approach than a scattergun approach. And with a sniper gun, you have to pick your target. Who are you aiming for? Is it a national decision maker? Which one? And one person is a good target to aim at. And then the second thing you have to remember is that targets are moving targets. They're not sitting still. So you need to aim at a target in the future. So right now we're aiming at COP26. COP26 is going to happen months from now. We need to think about, what's going to happen there? Who do we want to aim at there? How are we going to reach that person or that group? And in what form are we going to provide them with the inputs and the advice that we want them to listen to? So thinking ahead, planning ahead, being strategic, finding the right ways of communicating. And what we are trying to do this time around in Gobeshona, which we have never tried to do systematically before or even in CBA, is we want to be more strategic. So this year, 2021, is going to be the first year of the new decade. And we are aiming at a 10-year journey, we call it, of being more strategic and being more effective. So that it's not just good enough to have a good, exciting meeting, everybody is energized, learned a lot, networked a lot, but then not take things forward. We do want to take things forward. And what we've done is we've strategically identified 3 milestone events every year where we will take things forward. And we're starting now. This is the beginning. January 2021. We will then move to June 2021 for CBA 15. And then we will move to November 2021 for COP. And we have vehicles to do this. The CBA 15 is a vehicle we've been using for some time now. It's a tremendous community of practice that we can bring together every year. This year, we are going to be hosting it. It'll still be a virtual event, but BRAC and ICAD are going to be hosting it together with IID, who organize it every year. And then at the COP, we have the Development Climate Days, where we are able to bring together the key interlocutors that we want to reach with messages, and we will be able to reach them with our messages at the COP. So being strategic is an extremely important part of designing, taking time, following up, because just because you had a chance to talk to a decision maker and tell them what you want them to do doesn't mean they're going to actually do it. So you need to think about ways in which you can continue to talk to them and go back to them and see whether they're doing something or not doing something, or even better, persuade them to set up a mechanism where you talk to them on a regular basis and just follow through. They might tell you, yes, we're very interested, we'll do that. But you say, how are you going to do that? And how can we work together on this? So working on advocacy takes time, takes effort, takes investment of time and effort, but it doesn't have to be done by everybody. So that's another thing. Being strategic is not everybody has to do everything. Everybody can be involved in the decisions and the messages and the crafting of the messages, but then the advocates can be a small handful who are charged with going to the COP. Not everybody can go to a COP and deliver the messages there. And there's another layer, which I won't go into much detail in, but that we all need to be cognizant of for the locally led advocates, is the national layer. Often the national layer is a more impervious and more difficult layer. National has both local politicians, local government, local technical people, and then there are national level ministers and technocrats and bureaucrats, etc., and members of parliament, elected people as well. So at the national level, there's a whole panoply of decision makers that you want to address and plan to do messaging for and with. But then at the global level, we particularly focus on the COP, the Climate Change Conference of Parties, where we hope we can do that. And so I'll end by saying tomorrow in the closing session, we have Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who is the Adaptation Resilience Champion of COP26, very kindly agreed to come. She did a full session with us earlier on the first day of Gobeshona, and she's kindly agreed to come back tomorrow to listen and to give some, listen to us telling her what we want her to understand and take to the COP. And we also have Ovais Sarmad, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the UNFCCC Secretariat, who has also agreed to come and listen to us. So these are two very key people. We will have an opportunity to give them a message, and we will have an opportunity to ask them to advise us on how we can get that message into the COP process before ending up in the COP, because many of these decisions take place before the COP. Going to the COP might be a bit too late sometimes. And then at the COP, for those who are going to go to the COP, how to get those messages in. So my bottom line is, content of message is important. Strategically finding ways to deliver them effectively is even more important. And if you want to be effective, if you just want to, have your say and call it a day, that's fine. But if you want to have a result, an outcome, then investing in strategy is important. And that's what we're hoping to do. This Gobeshona conference is going to kick off a series of annual events that we hope will lead to all of us being much, much more effective in generating outcomes and impacts, which is something we really haven't tried very hard to do before. But I think the time has come for us to do that. So thank you very much for giving me the time, Sam.
Thank you very much, Salim, for setting that context and offering a focus about what the message is all about and why we produce them. So we're going to move on to the interactive part of the session now. I'm just going to reshare my screen as soon as I can find the right slide. Hold on a second. No, I seem to be having trouble sharing the screen. Here we go. So what we're going to do now is move on to using a Jamboard. Now, I'm not sure if people on the call have used a Jamboard before, but broadly, it's an interactive Jamboard, an interactive whiteboard that we can use as if we are together in a workshop, and it can be treated just like that. So in the chat, you will find a link to a Jamboard. Please feel free to click it and you should be able to enter it. And what you will see is a screen is a list of icons. And if you click on the icon with a white square and 2 lines in it, you'll be offered a text box where you can write in any message that you like or any thought that you have on the topic. You can also choose the color. And once you hit OK, that sticky note will be pinned to the whiteboard presentation. So I actually can't see the Jamboard because I'm sharing my screen. So I'm going to unshare my screen and join the Jamboard, and hopefully everybody will be able to see the same thing together. Now, if you have any problems joining the Jamboard, just send a message on the Zoom chat and we can see if we can fix it. For those who have just joined the call, don't worry if you missed the early presentations. We're going to use the breakout groups now to go into some more detail, and there will be an opportunity, I think, to catch up. So can I just check that those Jamboards are working okay? Great, so I can see some test messages happening in here. I think there are a few more people that can still join. We've got 11 viewers on the call so far, or on the Jamboard so far. So just click the link in the chat and you'll be able to join. So as you'll see, there are 2 questions on here. The first question is, what are the most important issues to discuss in the super year? And as you can see around the side, we've got some of the symbols of the major events. So let's start with the first question. If you want to write a sticky note and just identify, what do you think are the most important issues to discuss in the super year? And try to be as specific as you can. Feel free to move some of the sticky notes around. Please do not click on the clear frame button because that will delete everything and we'll have to start from scratch. So we've got financing for youth-led actions is one here. We've got one on locally led adaptation. I wonder if we could also add to that anything more specific. Is there anything particular about locally led adaptation that needs to be an area of focus this year? We've got COVID and climate change. Yes, I think that's absolutely really interesting, thinking about how we bounce back and the recovery from COVID-19. Building back better, but with sustainable practices. Loss and damage has come up here. Influencing negotiations to drive locally led action. A particular focus on the negotiations in that one and the influencing, which clearly is very important. We've got market linkages, another COVID one focusing on COVID-19 stimulus, really important. Great, okay, so I think we're able to use the sticky notes. I'm wondering now, I'm going to move some of these to the side. And there is a second question on here, what issues are most challenging to address? So on the right-hand side, could you pin a sticky note? Maybe answering the second question. I'm just going to minimize this sticky note. And we've got a question coming in on this sticky note. How can locally led action be supported on an international level as every region is facing different challenges on adaptation? I think that's a really great question. I'm going to ask that you take it into the breakout group when we go there and possibly address it towards the end of the session when we get to a little bit of Q&A. So on the right-hand side, could you add some of your responses to what issues are the most challenging to address? Tokenistic participation in international negotiations, yes, absolutely. Coordinating multiple stakeholders, yes, I think that's really challenging given the sheer numbers that there are. A question on how we improve the accountability of donors. Climate finance. Something specific on Article 6 on the carbon market here is a challenging issue. Great, so we'll just take another minute if you want to add your sticky notes on this second question. And if you want, you can just drag them to the right-hand side so that we can differentiate them from the answers on the left. Great. So really interesting answers coming out here from everyone on the call. Thank you for those. And if you're just joining, I'll just reiterate that you can add your responses here by clicking on the sticky note function on the left-hand side, which is the white box with 2 squares in it. Please don't touch the clear frame button and feel free to write some of your responses. Now, all of these are saved, and we are very happy to share this Jamboard with you afterwards, so you have notes and a quick overview or skim. So don't worry if you're trying to write these down, we can share this with you immediately afterwards. Great. So thank you for all of those contributions and a really interesting spread of issues and challenges that we need to address. We're going to go now into the breakout groups. Now there are going to be, how many people in the call? There are 19 in the call. So there are going to be 4 breakout groups, and I'm hoping that these smaller groups will allow us to have a really nice focused discussion. Each breakout group, let me share my screen again. So each breakout group is going to be given its own specific Jamboard. And that Jamboard is going to present you in a bit more detail some of the key messages from 3 of the themes and some guiding questions which you can add your sticky notes to that will help us be part of the note-taking process. And I really encourage you to treat this less like a webinar and more like a workshop session that you're in. Please feel free to share your thoughts and have a chat and allow the conversation to go where it leads. And broadly, these breakout groups are going to ask you to explore where we go with some of these messages. Is there anything that we're missing? Anything else that we need to focus on? So in a moment, you're going to be asked to assign to a breakout group. It's going to feel maybe like you're dropping out of the call. Don't touch anything. You will be, if you just wait, you will be assigned to the breakout group. So just hit join when that comes up. If you do lose your connection for any reason when you're in the breakout groups, that's okay. Just rejoin the Zoom call and Larissa will assign you back to the breakout group that you're in. You will see in the chat the links to the different Jamboards for each group. So those should still be there when you go into your breakout group. So feel free to click on those when you go through to your groups. So Larissa, when you're ready, could you trigger the breakout groups and that will allocate everybody into the rooms?
Yes. Ready?
Great, let's go. And if you just click join when that comes up and you'll be taken into your group.
For those who are still in this room, in the plenary room, would you want to join the groups? I can see you still here, so you can just click on the button saying join room and you'll be taken into your assigned breakout group. Let me know if you have any issues. Hi there. Once again, for joining the breakout groups, just press the button saying join room. I can see few of you are still here in the main room. So to be able to join the breakout groups, please make sure to press the button join room. Let me know if you have any issues with that.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. This is Larissa from IID speaking. We've gone into breakout groups, and I'm afraid probably you lost connection at that point. Would you want me to redirect you into one of the breakout groups to join the discussions?
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so you'll see a button coming up on your screen saying join breakout group.
Okay.
So you can just press on that one and I will direct you into the group.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
No problem. Did anything come up on your screen? Okay, great. Hi there, Francis. Thanks for joining us. The participants are now in breakout groups to do some discussions around the key messages at CBA. So I've assigned you to one of the breakout groups if you want to join the discussion. They've been in the breakout group already for 10 minutes now. But if you're happy, you can just click on the join group button that will come on your screen and you'll be directed into one of the breakout groups for the discussion with the team. Hi there. I can see we have 2 new people who have just joined this event. We have gone into breakout groups for discussions already 10 minutes ago. So if you're happy to go into the breakout group, I can send you in one of these. And you can join the discussion that is happening there, or if you prefer waiting here in the waiting room, we can wait and then hear back the messages from the participants once they're back in this room. That would be in 15 minutes. Hi there, I can see new people joining in. We are into breakout groups, and we've been having discussions for 15 minutes now. If you prefer being assigned to a breakout group, we can do that. They've already been in there for 10 minutes, or you can stay here and wait for them to come back and bring the key messages here in the plenary. Hi there. I can see we have 2 new participants. Most of those who joined the session are already in breakout groups having discussions. So you might be redirected to one of the breakout groups to join the discussion. There are only 8 minutes left for the discussion. And after that, you'll come back to the main plenary to share the key messages discussed in those sessions. We'll see you back in soon. Hi there, Monica. I can see you've joined us. You'll be assigned to one of the breakout groups. There are some discussions going on with the participants at the moment. There are only 7 minutes left, but it might be interesting for you to join and follow the end of that session. Once this is over, all the participants will come back to the plenary room and there will be a joint discussion. You'll see a message popping up in your screen saying join breakout group, and you can press join. Hi there, Pitika. I can see you've just joined the meeting. There are breakout groups at the moment going on with small group discussions. There are only 6 minutes left for those groups. So you'll be assigned to one of the groups and you can press join on your screen, and then you'll come back into the main session as soon as that is over. Hi there, I can see Sylvie just join us and Barkat. We've started breakout groups more than 20 minutes ago, so you'll be assigned to one of these. And apologies, the discussion might already be further in, but in 5 minutes, everyone will come back to the plenary and they will share the key messages that have been discussed in those breakout groups. So you can press join on the message popping up on your screen to join the breakout groups, and you'll be directed there. Hi, everyone. I can see everyone is slowly coming back to the plenary room. And now remaining participants will also join us, and we'll start with the next session. Sam, you back in?
I am back in the room. Thanks, Larissa, for that. So welcome back. I hope everybody was able to have an interesting discussion. I know there were some really interesting points coming out of both of the groups I was actually in, particularly the term brave accountability, which I really like. So I wonder if I can ask somebody from each of the groups just to give us a quick talk through of some of the highlights that you discussed. You don't necessarily need to go into everything, but I'm wondering if I can ask somebody from group one to just share some of the highlights from your discussion, areas of interest or things that you think everybody should know. So does group one have a speaker or facilitator?
Thanks, Sam. Yes, group one has a facilitator, that's me. And my first failing as a facilitator was to ask who in the group would like to do the readout. But we did have some really great discussions. Aneza, Charles, or Digamba, would either of you or any of you like to sort of feedback to the group some of the key points we discussed in our group? So Aneza, maybe, okay, so I think Aneza wanted to share, but she's unable to at the moment. I think she's having some tech issues, so apologies for that, Aneza. I'm happy to share your point. Yeah, okay, great. So she's just messaged me to say that she's happy for me to share her point. I'm sorry that you're having tech issues. So in our group, so Charles and Digamba, please do jump in and feel free to add to anything that I say, but I'll just be super quick. Really what we mostly focused on was responsive policy, and there were some really good discussions there. In particular, the 2 points that came up were about really being clear about who grassroots communities are when we talk about them, what group they represent, what it is that kind of connects them together, or is it about shared attributes that they have? Is it a women's group? Is it a youth group? Or is it about a particular issue that they're engaging in around water issues, for example? And so just being really specific about what it is about the grassroots community that kind of you want to bring into the decision making. And then Aneza's point was a really critical one, and that was around, and perhaps this could be something we can strengthen in the key messages, is around, it's not just about participation of local communities and people in decisions. It's not just about getting them at the table and having them as part of the discussion. It's about all of the different things that they need to enable action in their local community. So it's also about access to finance, ensuring that the tools are available to them to do the work. It's about access to education, etc. And so taking that sort of very holistic approach to engaging local communities and people is really important. We also did briefly touch on nature-based solutions, but not in a huge amount of detail. But what we did talk about, I think Digamba raised this point, and Digamba, do jump in if you'd like to, is around ensuring that traditional knowledge can be infused successfully with science to ensure that work on the ground is taking a more holistic perspective, but that there are lots of challenges associated with that. And Digamba gave a great example of how he's overcoming that in one of his EBA projects. Anything from group one that anyone wanted to add before we move on to group two?
Yes, I think you touched everything.
Great, perfect. Back to you, Sam.
Great, thanks, Ebony. Really interesting points. So group two, we were having a really interesting discussion. I don't know if anybody is able to, I know I missed the beginning of it, so I don't know if anybody is able to share some of the discussion from group two.
I can give it a go, but please do let me know. Just shout out, Sam, if there's connection issues or not.
Sure. Thanks, Barry. You go first,
okay.
and then I can do the second.
So we were looking at Okay, great. So we were looking at climate finance, and the first point is there was very strong agreement, particularly with longer term investments needed from funders, build institutions. I don't think there was any. Like nothing here is sort of particularly contentious or anything like that. However, I think there was a recognition, to keep please to jump in. Longer term investment it's not happening, and it's just and there's a lot of difficulties in making that happen. And I know we spoke about the Global Commission for Adaptation locally led action track, the principles which are launching, a lot of organizations of investment. But one of the key things is that there still are disincentives baked into the system. Donors still need to see results. The way in which they cast the problem are it's in a sort of logical framework way of doing things, and they are constituents. For the MTBs, they are capitalized by countries are capitalized by their citizens. So how do we get around that? How do we get around this grained into the system? And I don't think we didn't come up with an answer to that, but there's just a recognition that that there needs to be a real focus on that. So that was one of the key things that came up. And then one of the things we looked at as well was around institutional building capacity and capacity building. I'm really bad here, so I'm going to invite one of the colleagues that were in the group to chip in. But one of the things we wanted to look at was, every year we come and say build capacity, but what does that look like? Like really practically, how does that look? We need to think about that. We can't just keep on saying build capacity. We need to sort of think about that in practical. As a keep, I think you had some good points in this. So I'm just gonna hand over.
Saqib, are you able to share some thoughts on this?
Sorry, Barry, I lost a little bit. If somebody can maybe recap just the last bit of what Barry was looking for.
So Barry was mentioning the issue of capacity building and how do we really make it work in practice. We all talk about it, but what does effective capacity building look like?
Yeah, so I think we were just getting into that in our discussion, just about what sort of success indicators, quote unquote, the people would define capacity building to be achieved. So when we are doing sort of, let's say, workshops or trainings or so, what is it that we're looking for? There's a donor mentality of just how many people do you reach. There's a mentality of how many trainings have you given, but that doesn't really give out any effective capacity. There's got to be quite a lot more follow up. And again, I think me and Barry and Joel were having a little discussion about how capacity building and sort of making sure that people are actually able to use the knowledge you give in a training or a workshop. It sort of blends somewhere between the kind of workshops and trainings that we do and somewhere between a sort of formal education system where you're able to track people. Do they actually understand the issue? Are they able to use that knowledge? Maybe they're being inspired by the knowledge that you're giving and doing something different. They found another solution of their own. But the current metrics of sort of capacity building doesn't really track that, and there's really no way of sort of reflecting that. People taking your framework or your theory and doing something different with that. The current metrics don't cover that, and it's seen as a training that you've just given as a tick box exercise, but not really something that you can yet measure.
I'm on mute.
You're
Thanks, Saqib. I think that's a really important issue. And actually, I was in a fascinating Gobeshona session on the BACS process in Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Academy, Climate Academies, and their training dialogue approach, which I thought was particularly interesting. We also talked in this group, we looked at the NatureBased Solutions team, and actually we ended up having a chat about what locally led action really means in practice. So we were talking about, everybody agrees that participation is important. We all we all talk about, you know, from the GCF to governments, everybody talks about the importance of participation, but we are maybe not holding ourselves accountable for it strongly enough. And Ashish was talking about the concept of accountability, which I liked the sound of, actually, and that was something that was quite challenging. You know, we're all part of this system, but the decision making is not being made by the most affected people, and we need to think about how we hold ourselves accountable to change institutions so that that can happen. So we're going to come on now to group 3. Is there anybody that can share perspectives?
Thank you, Sam. This is Tashfik. So we had 3 people in the group, and I was the facilitator as well as the note taker. So we are going to, we discussed on climate finance issues, and we came up with three basic elements of the topic. One is capacity building, other thing is climate finance flow, and the last one is planning. So everyone else discussed about capacity building, but we have come up with 2 interesting things. That is, in capacity building scenarios, include more and more community-based organizations, youth organizations, and I mean emphasize on using simpler languages in terms of jargons, because the practitioners who are working in the national government are mostly dealing with jargons that is related to climate change sector. So it is quite hard to grasp the whole thing from the local level if you even translate them into the local context. So coming up with simpler language in the capacity building session would work a lot. And the second thing is flow of climate finance. So one of the participants emphasized on flowing climate finance on the basis of experience, and on the basis of targeting multiple solutions, not just only one solution to one problem, as well as science-based solutions. She emphasized on science-based solutions. And if you are going to partnering with several organizations across the nation using the ICT-based, partnership forums, so that climate finance flow become more transparent and accountable. And last thing we discussed is planning, and one of the participants emphasized on the participatory planning is missing at the local level. So in the planning process, local level dynamics are taken away by the decision makers. So local level, even if it is women or men, nobody in the decision making process is present. So, and the other thing is that the participant emphasized on validating Agenda 21 on the ground level, and we should also validate a need assessment in the ground level while planning for climate change project, even if it is a development project. So mostly the local level issues are sacrificed during a development project. So this is all we have captured, but I would also like to request the participants, if I have just to elaborate on things that I might have missed. Thank you. I can't hear you, Sam.
Twice in a session. Anybody else from Group 3 want to chip in? Or
yeah, I would like to share some points. I was in that group. I have been in the developmental program for over 3 decades. It was in 1992 I got a Sustainable Development Library gift from IAED, 1992. And being a part of ADB, World Bank and Dutch Mission and other things, my learning is we are not respecting Agenda 21, especially Community Enabling 8 Action Plan. Since we are not adhering to that, most of the projects, bilateral and various developmental projects, are not validated. For example, I can quote you the Urban Development Project, whereas involved an Asian Development Project. It was costing 137 crores Indian rupees, and we could not validate any component. Simply top-bottom approach. Likewise, I can quote you a good number of World Bank projects, and in case of Dutch project, it was double funding. Same project, 2 angle photos, it rocked the parliament in Holland. What I want to conclusively say is this is the time. You must respect the community-based initiatives, nature-based. See, for example, nature-based has got a close relation to UN IETC. United Nations in IETC is an offshoot of 1992 summit. And none of us are referring that. What does it mean? Environmentally sound technology has been defined so well. That is not done. So we do a lot of things, believe in science, believe in society, but good things are happening. But let me, tentatively infer or conclude my response by saying that let us allow the community to decide their destiny. If we allow them to care for the environment, it's possible. Otherwise, how is it possible? So thank you very much. Thank you.
Many thanks for that contribution. It sounds like it was a really rich discussion. Great. We're going to go on to group 4, and I know I had to leave that group halfway through. I think Tanya we've lost. Obed or Anne, are you able to just share a few perspectives from the discussion that you had?
Yeah, I can quickly share. Then maybe my group members, my group mates can also add what I've left. Under group 4, we discussed climate finance, and generally there was a general feeling among the members that the messages were really well done and well crafted, but there was more emphasis on the role of civil society organizations, the role they play in ensuring that climate finance reaches those who really need them, especially the vulnerable communities, especially their role in tracking finance to ensure that this finance is used for the intended purposes and reaches those who need it. And there also emphasis on creation of structures at the local level to enable communities and local vulnerable groups to be able to access these funds. And in terms of what was missing or ideas that are more important that I think needs to be discussed further is the issue of loss and damage, which was also missing in the messages, and the finance to address the loss and damage. As you know, loss and damage, those who are vulnerable are the most affected by loss and damage. I think this should also form part of the discussions. There was also discussions around the distinction between mobilizing and accessing finance. Do we separate these issues when it comes to the local access? Do we separate mobilizing and accessing finance when we have these discussions around local access to finance? Or do we need to talk about them together? And how do we ensure that both aspects of access and mobilizing are given much prominence that they deserve? In terms of incentives, how do we change the incentives? How do we shape these incentives, and what are these incentives? And how do we need to shape them to be able to along the chain of climate finance delivery, and how do we go about it? I think that needs to be clarified further. Then in terms of accountability, there needs to be accountability needs to be given more prominence in terms of disbursement to ensure the funds, as I mentioned before, reach those who need them the most in a transparent manner. We were not able to discuss responsive policy because of time, but one of the messages that was coming when we started discussing is around impact evaluation. So we have these policies, the local, national, and even global. How do we evaluate the impact? And how are we able to evaluate that? I mean, how that these policies have been able to address the needs of those who are most vulnerable. So I think this point came from Dr. Nuru. If you are there, I think you can elaborate it further. And any other group member who feels that I've missed out anything. Thank you so much. Sam, we can also chip in because you're also part of our group before you ran away.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just open it up to anybody else who participated in that group to feed in.
I just want to add that my points was explained very well by our group leader. What I wanted to say about evaluating any policies we take to see whether it's working or what we have learned. And I was very interested in the flow of the logic of all the messages. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you everybody for feeding back. If you have notes, written notes, I'd be really grateful. If you have written notes alongside your Jamboard, I'd be really grateful if you could send those to me. I will post my email address in the chat. Some really interesting themes emerging about what participation means, about what do we mean to shift incentives around climate finance, and also in particular on accountability. How do we hold ourselves accountable for ensuring that participation takes place? And how do we ensure that we're making impact? And I think that the implication is, how do we respond to that impact? I think it seems to have been a theme in many of the groups. So we have about 20 minutes left. I want to take this opportunity to open up for two things. One, some comments on on the future of CBA, and in particular how we think about CBA 15, and also to pick up any questions for the speakers that you might have. So to do that, I'm just going to reshare my screen again. And you should be able to see a slide with a couple of plenary questions in it. So one of the questions here is, what issues do we need to make sure we focus on at CBA 15 to have the most impact? If you would like to speak, please just raise your hand in the participant box, or you can even put something in the chat and I can read it out. And this is a particularly crucial moment because we are in the process of planning CBA 15 at the moment and thinking about the direction of the themes. So I'd be really interested to hear what the perspectives of those who have reflected on the messages are in terms of what do we need to focus on at CBA 15 to have the most impact, and particularly reflecting on what Salim's comments were earlier. So if anybody has any comments to make, please let me know. Or write something in the chat. So there is a comment from Ineza. Over to you. Would you like to unmute?
Okay. Hi, everyone. So for my first thoughts of what CBA 15 can focus on, it will be great if we can have a little bit about the climate justice in relation with the COVID-19. And also, again, the youth inclusion, but in the sense that youth are able to showcase their impact and their voices, and making sure that their voices are being heard, because that would be great. And especially since it will be a little bit in between the COP, I presume, because you've been before the COP, it's really be nice to kind of highlight the least developed country needs and voices to be addressed in the COPs in areas such as the carbon market or transparency or even the finance, that would be something interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ineza. Really interesting. There's a comment from Barry, multi-dimensional transparency, up and down and inward and outward, all directions of transparency. I think upwards and downwards transparency is something that we are starting to understand better. I'm wondering if maybe in the chat, Barry, if the connection is not great, we could elaborate further on what multi-dimensional transparency means. I think that's really interesting in the way that it links to accountability. I don't know if you could speak or write in the chat, but if anybody else wants to comment here, you'd be very welcome.
May I go, Sam?
Please.
Yeah, I was exactly trying to echo with Barry. So that's probably to my point that I was talking about brave accountability. Okay, this is time to hold ourselves accountable to see that what we are doing on ground, whether in line with the commit or what making noise in the world, really rightly we are doing it on ground or not. So when we talk about brave accountability, so in 4 dimensions: inward accountability, upward accountability, then sorry, inward, outward, then upward and downwards. So I just echo with Very, that might be one of our key concepts for CBA 15, that we will come out the evidences and examples what we are doing on ground for our brave accountability. Over.
Thank you for that. Really, really very interesting. There is a comment here, the progress we have made in the last decade in real terms and what was successful and what areas still need attention. Taking a look back. Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting idea. We are very good at talking about what hasn't worked as well as what has. Yes, an opportunity to reflect, I think, is something that we do need to consider within the space, particularly as we look forward to the next 10 years of locally led action. So thank you for that comment in the chat.
Even Sam, we can title a session for CBA 15. Okay, that's a failure festival. We'll share our failure.
There was a plenary session a couple of years ago called Celebrating Failure, actually, which was run by...
That means holding ourselves accountable, because we don't talk about that much about our failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do need to get better at doing it in a safe space. So learning from failure, absolutely a theme that's coming forward and links back to the comments before about impact evaluation and accountability. So another question, maybe with a slightly different focus, is where is there room in these messages for innovation and development of ideas? Is there anywhere where we think there is scope to push the thinking forward, that beyond maybe what's been said in the past? So any comments on that one, either in the chat or feel free to jump in directly onto the call. So a few comments: good governance, transparency and accountability, rule of law and inclusion. Any other thoughts on this issue of where we can push for innovation on these messages, and even how we might think about doing that? Less room for innovation there, but that's fine. Answers on a postcard or to my email address. Be very happy to hear those, or even if you just want to take a minute and as we close out, thinking about those, feel free to write those in the chat. There is a comment here about engaging the private sector. I think that's something that we probably haven't done that much in the past at CBA, and it's been even tougher in an online environment. And how do we do it effectively? We had a very interesting conversation a couple of years ago at CBA where there was an argument about whether the private sector could ever support the most vulnerable, which was a really interesting moment. So private sector and the green circular economy, really interesting comments. So we're now coming to the end of the session. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. There's still comments in the chat coming in, so thank you. Please keep feeding them in. It's been a really interesting discussion. I think there's some very interesting themes that have come out of it, and we actually have members of the programming group on the call, including myself and Tanya and Obed, who are all able to take these forward directly into the way that we think about the CBA 15 programming. I want to take this opportunity to ask you to make a note in your diary. The CBA conference will be from June the 14th till June the 19th, and it's going to feature 2 days of workshops, similar to this one, with anyone that joined the conference last year will know. Speak, and all of the sessions will seek to be interactive. We really put a focus on taking a workshop approach to some of these ideas, and we'll have a third day which will be a focus on networking, sorry, not networking, training. It's going to be based on peer-to-peer trainings. Anybody with a skill, that's with others, and it will be a day concepts and ideas, and strengthening from how to write effective blogs right through to a course in climate finance. We're really open to ideas, so please bear that in mind. Last year we had about 500 people participating, and I'm hoping that that will be the same again. And in the super year, it's absolutely essential that we get as many perspectives and voices as possible into the discussion, so that we can craft messages that represent climate adaptation practitioners. So please put that in your diary. We'll be launching more communications for that in February. As with all CBAs, you'll also be invited to submit your own sessions. So watch out on February 15th. You'll be able to submit your concepts for sessions that revolve around these 3 themes. So perhaps you want to run a session on brave accountability or multi-dimensional transparency. Let us know and we'll help to facilitate that. All CBA sessions happen by bringing different partners together, maybe sometimes unnatural bedfellows, so that they can share perspectives and build something new and innovate together. So we're really happy to help facilitate different groups. So keep an eye out for that. It's really essential to CBA that the community of practice helps us shape the content around these themes, and particularly in this super year. So with that, I want to thank all of the speakers for sharing their thoughts today. And I want to thank the facilitators for helping to facilitate the different groups. And lastly, I want to thank all of the participants for sharing your thoughts and managing some of the connection issues and experimenting with us on the Jamboard. It's really appreciated. And if you do have any comments, you can find or further thoughts, feel free to email me, sam.greene@iid.org, and do keep an eye out for all of the CBA 15 materials that are coming soon. So thank you very much for your participation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Gobeshona and the rest of your day. Thank you very much. I'm going to close the call in about 20 seconds.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sam.